Back tonight in Focus. Unions representing South African post office workers have warned of looming job cuts. They say the state-owned entity has begun Section 189 consultations that may see up to 40% of the workforce laid off. Joining us now for more on this is Aubrey Tshabalala, the General Secretary of the Communications Workers Union. Aubrey, good evening and thank you very much for your time. It's a concern that the post office is currently not in a financially sound position. We spoke to them the other time. There was a sense from the workers particularly that their medical aid contributions, for example, were not being made. And the post office feeling it would need to lay off 6,000 jobs at least in the next 2 years to put it in a better financial position. What's your response as the Communication Workers Union?
Well, good evening, Thabo, and viewers. Our response, Thabo, is that this is the most senseless decision that can ever be taken by any institution that seeks to thrive in the modern day postal and courier services. Because one of the things that you need in that space is a broader network that will make you to connect from point 1 to point B. And you will need a workforce that is necessary, particularly now on the modern day of the technology, where most people buy online and things of that nature. So you need a manpower. So if you have a vision of growing any business in that space, that's one of the things that you need. So it's a backward thinking to say when you need money, you have to cut workers so that you can then expect that will generate profit somehow. It's a very just backward thinking.
So what other options do they have? Because it seems they have approached Labour with a number of options which have been rejected, one being that of people taking sovereign's packages and people not taking those, another proposal being that of cutting salaries or reducing of working hours. What options do they have when they are clearly not in a good financial position?
Well, there's two things. One of the things is that some in their turnaround strategies, some of the proposals that they are making, actually, union make them backdate in 2013. That shows you that there's an opportunity for a business to grow. That's one point. But two, you cannot only blame the executive with leaving out the government itself. The government here has played a very huge role to bottleneck the commercialization of post offices, as it were. One of those things is at a regulatory level, where they are regulated in terms of pricing their products. And you liberate the sector, which is postal and courier services, for multinational companies to expand in that space, but you have limited post office. That is one area. One of the clumsiest and the backwards decision that they've taken, the government, is to separate Post Bank and the post office. It's not in line with the best practice internationally. We have seen what he has done to Royal Mails, that decision, and they just taken that decision. So most of the decisions are not at the footstep of workers. Now you've asked a question, what options do they have? Options that they have basically is that we have to upgrade the infrastructure of post office, which they left it to decay. You have to make sure that the government itself utilizes post office. Government spend more than 20 billion rands on per annum on the issues of postal and courier services. If you give 60% of that business to post office, that is a bailout. So post office does not need a bailout per se. It needs a proper business plan and structural way.
Yeah. There were talks of a private individual. I don't know whether it was an entity or just the individual himself who says that they've been making proposals, for example, to the Minister of Communications to buy the post office. Would Labour welcome that kind of intervention?
Well, I can say now everyone who has money can buy post office because that's a lucrative business. That's the first one. But once post office falls into the hands of private, you must think of that person, that poor student whose home is at Limpopo and is studying in Western Cape and has to send ID and so forth. How much will they spend if there was no post office? So even in the most capitalist system world, America amongst others, Post office is the only one that is nationalized, and the army, the rest are private. So to privatize post office is not an idea. But when you have a state like this one, where basically they collapse post office with all of us looking at it, you tend to think about those areas. But what we are pushing as Labour is that post office is basically one of the lucrative institutions, and it needs to be protected, it needs to be enhanced. It needs to make sure that it delivers and services the poor. And of course, we need expertise in that space. And people who make these proposals are people who are actually saying, from the private sector, who've been in post office, who have made proposals to government, and the government did not take those proposals seriously.
So at this stage, I mean, what you're proposing, of course, investment in the infrastructure to upgrade the post office to make it more relevant to the current economy, open up the courier services, for example. All those things, one would say, are long-term strategies that could possibly work in terms of a turnaround strategy. We don't know yet. But in terms of the immediate intervention to save 6,000 jobs?
Yes, look, I agree on this point with the executive of Post Office that the Treasury should have located a bailout money. And we are not fans of a bailout. And I'll tell you the reason why we're saying that. It is the same government that decided to separate Post Bank from Post Office. And all the reserves were given to Post Bank. And now we are literally, that is a decision taken a couple of months ago. We are literally leaving a post office empty, with empty pockets. So what does that mean? Because we have taken that decision as a government, we should have taken a decision to make a bailout. But retrenching workers, we have seen it in telecom, we have seen it everywhere else, we have seen it recently at SAPC. It does not resolve the problem. It gives you a temporal relief that you're not paying the salaries. The point is that today workers are sitting with their statutory benefits not being paid, medical aid not being paid. And one of the things that they proposed, the VSP, voluntary severance packages, to workers. And many workers took that opportunity. Guess what? They couldn't afford it. And we know we're mind-boggled now that they are proposing Section 189, which at the minimum, the law requires that you pay 1 week per service to that worker. So if you cannot afford VSP, how will you afford retrenchment? So just to give you a picture, workers are owed more than 3 years of their pension. Right. So if you retrench that worker, right, without the investment of 2 years plus, right, of their pension, it means we are disadvantaging that worker. And on top of that, those workers are in the debts of the medical aid itself that they did not pay. Right. So workers here have been defrauded, and they need to be defended, and that's what we are going to do.
Aubrey, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Communications Workers Union General Secretary Aubrey Tshabalala.